I was very happy that you brought up the word enlightenment in this morning's meditation, because that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about. Because as your definition of the recognition or the revelation of the nature of our being, it seems like we would be walking around with a lot more enlightened beings than Hinduism and Buddhism would give credit for. So I imagine there must be a discrepancy with the definition. For example, I loved your interview with Swami Sarvapriyananda. Now here's a guy, a monk, that's dedicating his life to this enlightenment project in a tradition that would say that the odds of him achieving it in his lifetime are very rare. And he himself says he's not enlightened. So I don't want to be too provocative, but it would go a long way to dismiss the notion of an extraordinary, rare experience that this is. If, for example, you were to answer the question, are you enlightened?
Only being is. No person is ever enlightened. And being is not enlightened, because being just is the light of the self. You see, it's Anthony.
Yes.
You're asking me something, Anthony, you're asking me about enlightenment. I tried to discredit the whole idea of enlightenment this morning. I tried to get rid of the idea that enlightenment is some extraordinary experience for 1 in a million people. I just don't think like that. I don't think that I'm enlightened as a person. I don't think Raman Maharshi was enlightened as a person. I think being is the light of the self, and I think it shines equally brightly in all people. When I look at you, that's all I see is just how many are we? 110, 120 enlightened beings. It would be an insult to you to think of you as anything else. It would be a denial of God's being. It would be a denial of truth. It would be a denial of reality to see you as anything else. I don't think there are any people, individual people, either to be enlightened or not to be enlightened. I just think there's being. And everything and everyone shines as that being. That's all I see when I see you. Just the one being shining in all these beautiful, unique, quirky, eccentric forms. That being never becomes darkened by experience, and it's never enlightened by spiritual practice. Anthony, I can't answer your question.
But that's an answer, and that's very helpful for me to hear. And
Raman, don't take it from me. Ramana Maharshi himself said, don't meditate. Don't meditate. Just be. He didn't encourage people to meditate. Even self-inquiry, it wasn't his highest practice. People think, self-inquiry was Ramana Maharshi's highest practice. No, it wasn't. He only developed that as a concession to people, to those of his students and devotees and so on, that couldn't simply be with him. That's all he wanted people, was just to be with him. And then as a concession to those that insisted that they give him that he give them something to do, he said, okay, practice self-inquiry. If you have to do something, practice self-inquiry. But it wasn't his highest method. It was a concession, a beautiful concession, and a valid one, and one, as you know, a concession that I'm willing to make and often do make. But as those of you that have been around the teaching for a number of years have realized, I make that concession less and less. 5 years ago, all we did was self-inquiry. Now, very rarely. We do what we did this morning. The art of laziness. The art of being. Doing absolutely nothing. Just being. Don't meditate. Just be. And being is never darkened by experience and never enlightened by practice. So what I said this morning about giving up the idea of enlightenment, I really meant it. I really meant it. Give up the idea of enlightenment. Because enlightenment is predicated on the belief that we are unenlightened individuals. That's blasphemy.
I've been attending, and I met you about 18 months ago, and the first big move there was to leave the organization I was in for 40 years, which was quite a big move, and all the things associated with that. The next thing that arose is that my son told me he's gay. This goes down like a lead balloon here. I was brought up at the time where that was illegal, and in terms of the organization I was in, frowned tremendously on that type of behavior. I love my son dearly, and it took me to question all the assumptions that I'd made and had been given, and refer them back to consciousness. There aren't any answers there, but you've given indication when you actually refer back that you speak in the moment what is appropriate. So certainly I did that with my son, and our relationship is fine. But it led to questioning a lot of things that I'd based my life on. The next thing that comes along is my wife sends me a curveball. And there the question on how I saw myself. I saw the whole story of husband, father, things which I'd based my life around, literally fall away. It was like a death. So I've almost had 3 deaths. Deaths to in terms of the organization I was in, death to the concepts that I had grown up with and told to believe in and operated from, and death to my own personal story. The way forward isn't entirely clear. Resting in being is well established. But what comes up is, I finished my part of King Lear. That's done. Where's my next part? I like to know the lines ahead of time. And so the mind wants to know what's next.
Peter, your desire to know what's next is one of the last remnants of the ego or separate self in you. The investment of your identity in the organization that you were part of for 40 years, in your son being in a particular way, being a married man, all the investment in your identity in these 3 activities or relationships has, as you say, it has dissolved. They've been taken away from you. And so as you say, it's like a death. It's not like a death, it is a death. It is a death of the separate self. The separate self is the identification of ourself with some kind of limitation, activity or relationship, for instance. So you're right, it's not like a death, it is a death of the separate self, the ego in you. And as the ego is dying in you, it is crying out for something to substantiate itself, to remain alive. What next? If I can find something, if I can find the next thing, the next relationship, the next activity, I will stay alive. So I'm afraid that what next question has to remain unanswered, because if I or anyone else were to give you an answer to the what next question, it would satisfy you in the short term because it would let you know what to do next week. but it would not deeply satisfy you because it would validate the separate self in you. In other words, it wouldn't be what you really want. So I would encourage you to just let go of that question. Let it remain unanswered. And that will be difficult for you, Peter. You want... Everything is being taken away from you. You want something that is on. You want to know something. You want to attach yourself to something. Oh, I know what I'm doing, where I'm going to be in 3 weeks' time. But God has taken everything away from you. Krishna's cow. You know the story, Shankaracharya's story, Krishna's cow. So you've had your last cow taken away. And now you're asking God to replace it with something. God's saying, no, sorry, Peter, I took all this away from you so that you might come closer to me. So have the courage not to demand to know what the next thing is. But there will be a next thing. It'll come. It might not come immediately. There will almost certainly have to be this pause before the next thing emerges. Wait in that pause without knowing what the next thing is. Have the courage not to have to know what the next thing is. Pause. Consciousness never asks the question, what next?
Yes.
That's why it's always at peace. It has no vested interest in what's next. It doesn't stand to gain or lose anything from what happens next.
And it's not interested in what's happened, and it's not interested in my story.
No. And that's not to say, Peter, that it's not valid for you to be interested in what's happened. You've gone through a tremendous upheaval, by any standards, a tremendous upheaval in this last year. And it's valid for you to think about it, to want to understand it, to want to reflect on it, to want to learn from it, and so on. So by saying that consciousness is not interested in it, it isn't a dismissal of your very legitimate interest in what has happened. So it's fine for you to ponder. Of course you must ponder what has happened. But yes, at the deepest level, consciousness doesn't even know what's just happened to you. Do an experiment now, Peter. You don't have to actually stop thinking. It's enough to imagine it. Just to imagine now stopping thinking. Because thought is the activity of your mind. Just stop thinking. Consciousness is still fully present, yes? In the absence of thinking, does consciousness know anything at all about your past?
No.
Does it know that you've just had lunch?
No.
Does it know anything about your wife, your son, your organization?
No.
Does it know anything about what might happen tomorrow, the next day, or next year?
No.
Absolutely nothing. Consciousness knows nothing of those things. It's not only not concerned about them, it doesn't know about them. It just knows this. And it's always, always at peace and happy with just this. It doesn't know anything else. It only knows something else through the activity of the mind. It's either terrifying or liberating, depending on how we look at it, to realize that our entire past is contained in a single thought about it. It's not possible to have more than one thought at a time. Our entire past is contained in the thought we have about it. In the absence of that thought, there's no experience of a past. And it's terrifying for the ego to consider that because of its investment. Much of its identity is drawn from its association with our past and much of it with our future. But the past and the future are just contained in a single thought. So from one point of view, our past seems to be immense. What you've just gone through is, as I said earlier, by any standards, you've gone through a tremendous upheaval. You could also argue that what you've just gone through is contained in a single thought.
That thought has with it a feeling, it's a...
Yes. Yes.
It's not just verbal, it's emotional as well.
Yes, it's contained in your body. There's a series of a network of sensations and tensions in the body, and that network of sensations and tensions, just offer it to the space of consciousness. Just surrender it to the space of consciousness. Because the feelings, in the absence of the commentary, in the absence of the subtitles, in the absence of the story that accompanies them, it's a series of sensations in the body, a series of tensions or contractions. Just surrender them to the space of awareness.
Even while resting in being, those tensions and things don't disappear.
They don't disappear, and they don't need to disappear. The screen is always in the same condition, irrespective of what's taking place in the movie. So yes, there may be tensions and contractions. There may be the accompanying storyline. That's fine. Your being is still in the same pristine, peaceful condition than it was in last year, 10 years ago, when you were a newborn infant. Your being's always in the same condition. It doesn't matter what is or is not happening in experience. Every time you fall asleep at night, you experience your peaceful being, just because it is no longer clothed in experience. Experience dissipates as we fall asleep and leaves just the peace of being. Well, that peace of being is present now, not just in deep sleep, not just when we fall asleep. It underlies all experience.
One experience that I had recently was I had to go to hospital for a small operation, and I was very relaxed, resting in being, but very puzzled that all the things you're hooked up to, the body was reacting to the situation, but I wasn't feeling anxious or concerned at all. So clearly that the body is still playing the part it would have played, but I wasn't connected to that at all.
Exactly, and exactly the same is now true of your mind, which is the equivalent of being hooked up to all sorts of instruments. Your mind has gone through this ordeal in this last year, and so all sorts of things are happening to your mind, just as all sorts of things were happening to your body. But you felt your being was independent of it. Your being was at peace throughout the whole process. Well, consider that you've just undergone an operation, not on your body, but your mind has just undergone an operation, and various elements of it have been removed. So your mind has been under an operation, but your being remains intact, just as your being remained intact when you were going through a physical operation. Your mind has been going through a mental operation, a mental ordeal, but your being is intact all the way through. And you just remain as your being. Let the mind go through whatever operation or ordeal it has to go through, just as you let your body go through whatever operation it had to go through. And you just remained as being all the way through. And you were okay. You came through the operation fine. You will come through this mental ordeal fine. You will, I have no doubt, Peter, that in a year's time, it takes a while for these upheavals to settle down, but I have absolutely no doubt at all that you will be fine, more than fine, that you'll be at peace and happy. And in a funny sort of way, you'll even see the rightness of everything that's happened in a year or so time. But don't wait for a year. Trust that now. And I see that you do already.
The self is peace and happy now.
Perfect.
It's not affected by it at all.
Perfect. Just stay there. And it doesn't mean, just because you remain there, you don't think, okay, well, I don't have to go to hospital to have this procedure. No, you still went to hospital. You still had the the procedure, whatever it was. You still recognize, no, this needs to happen to my body. I'm just going to remain as being all the way through. Well, this needs to happen to your mind. This ordeal or operation that your mind is going through now, it had to happen for a reason that you don't understand. You don't quite understand why you had to do the physical operation. It was completely out of your control. Well, the same thing at a mental level. It's happening because of all sorts of elements in your life, some of which you were aware of, some of which you weren't aware of. But your mind has to go through this operation. You just remain as being all the way through. And as you say, if you do that, I see the evidence of it. You're at peace. Doesn't mean to say that there isn't turbulence at the level of the mind. Of course there is. That's fine. But you just remain as being all the way through. And that peace, it'll just get stronger and stronger. I see it's already happening in you. It will just continue to, the peace of your being will just continue to shine more and more brightly. I'm not always happy. I don't always feel free. I'm not always lonely, but I am always me. I'm not always happy, but I am always me. I'm not always naughty. I don't often feel shy. I'm not always hungry, but I am always I. I'm not always sleepy. I don't often cry. I'm not always messy, but I am always I. I'm not always nice. I don't always try. I'm sometimes forgetful, but I am always I. Once I was 2, for a while I was 3. I'm not always 4, but I am always me. Sometimes I'm lazy, but I don't ever lie. I'm not always cheerful, but I am always I. I'm not always right, but I do what I can. I may not be perfect, but I am what I am. Everything changes, so what can I be? I cannot be anything, but I am always me.